momentarily. Hello, everyone. I'm Cicely Harris. I'm the first Deputy Commissioner of the New York State Division of Human Rights. Thank you for being here with us. As you may have noted already, we have ASL interpreters on today's webinar. This webinar is being captioned. You can activate captions by clicking the closed caption button on the Zoom toolbar. If you have any tech concerns, please place your questions in the chat feature at any time during the panel discussion. That chat button is on the Zoom toolbar as well. DHR staff are available in the chat as panelists. You can chat to the DHR staff at any time using the webinar functions. This program is being recorded, and we will make a copy available to all attendees in a follow-up email. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce our Commissioner, Maria Imperial.
Thank you so much, Cicely. That was a wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our celebration of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Thank you all for joining us. 32 years ago, the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law. It took decades of effort from tens of thousands of individuals across the country to make this legislation a reality. The enactment of the ADA marked a moment where the lives of persons living with disabilities would be forever changed, vesting them with rights to be free from discrimination in employment, access to government services, transportation, and places of public accommodation. New York can also be proud of its progressive place in history in civil rights for persons with disabilities. Many of those who led the fight for the ADA were New Yorkers. And protections for persons with disabilities in New York State's human rights law predate the ADA by 16 years, going back to 1974. And many of the protections found in the ADA are mirrored in the state's human rights law. In another milestone, this past February, Governor Kathy Hochul established the Office of the Chief Disability Officer to advocate on behalf of persons with disabilities and appointed the phenomenal Kim Hill, who is joining us today as the state's first Chief Disability Officer. Having a dedicated office advocating for the disabled community is a unique opportunity to ensure the inclusion of the people with disabilities needs into New York State policies and help protect against discrimination of persons with disabilities. In recognition of the need to effectively communicate with persons representing the disability community, the New York State Division of Human Rights established a Disability Advisory Council for the agency this year. It is the first of its kind for the division and includes representation from a wide variety of persons with disabilities and the agencies dedicated to their support. The division has been working closely with this council, and the speakers for today's events are participants thereon. Earlier this week, I had the honor of joining Kim Hill and Governor Hochul as she signed a legislative package to further support people with disabilities. The package includes new legislation recognizing supported decision-making as a less restrictive alternative to guardianship, changing the landscape by empowering individuals to make their own decisions with the support of a trusted person in their lives. Other legislation makes the necessary step of replacing outdated and offensive terms with wording that give people with disabilities the respect they deserve. As we reflect on 32 years of progress and achievement, we also must acknowledge that there's much more that needs to be done to ensure equality and accessibility in our state. And we'll discuss that in much more detail in today's program. I'm now going to turn it over to DHR's Director of Disability Rights, John Herrian, who will introduce our esteemed presenters. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Commissioner. Good to be with everybody this afternoon. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome and introduce our panelists for this afternoon's program. Opening the program up is the state's first Chief Disability Officer, Kim Hill. Kim was appointed as the state's first Chief Disability Officer in February of 2022 by Governor Kathy Hochul. Ms. Hill had most recently served as the principal analyst for the New York State Assembly Standing Committee on People with Disabilities. She previously served as director of the Assembly Task Force on People with Disabilities, which focused on issues pertaining primarily to people with physical and sensory disabilities. In that role, Ms. Hill worked with disability advocates, New York State Assembly chairpersons, and staff on several priority issues, which led to the passage of bills such as the Most Integrated Setting Coordinating Council, the Nursing Facility Transition and Diversion Waiver, New York State's Medicaid Buy-in Program, and the codification of Titles II and III of the Americans with Disabilities Act into the New York State Human Rights Law. Under Ms. Hill's leadership, the Office of the Chief Disability Officer will work to establish New York as a model for inclusivity, integration, and accessibility by ensuring all state policies, programs, and activities truly meet the needs of all people with disabilities. Following Ms. Hill, we have Alex Thompson. Alex is the Director of Advocacy at the New York Association on Independent Living. Alex previously worked as New York Association on Independent Living's communications specialist. He became a disability rights advocate after experiencing many barriers following a high-level spinal cord injury in 2001 while in high school. Alex serves as a board member and chapter advocacy lead with the United Spinal Hudson Valley chapter and as a Christopher Reeve Foundation peer mentor. He is a former American Association of People with Disabilities intern, fellow in long-term services and supports at the National Council on Aging, CIO at the National Association of Law Students with Disabilities, and systems advocate at the Resource Center for Accessible Living. Alex is a graduate of Bucknell University and St. John's University School of Law. Following Alex, we'll have Jerry Bergman. Jerry is a retired public relations and public affairs executive. He began losing his hearing over a decade ago and relies on 2 cochlear implants for his profound hearing loss. In 2009, Jerry joined the Hearing Loss Association of America and became increasingly involved in helping others understand how to cope with hearing loss and maximize their ability to hear using assistive technology. His hearing loss consumer advocacy work fostered the adoption of 2 precedent-setting New York City laws. In 2017, New York City adopted a bill requiring major construction and renovation projects receiving city funds to include large area assistive listening technology at information security areas and in at least one meeting area open to the public. It has sparked similar legislation in other cities and states. And the New York City ordinance, which took effect in May of this year, requires the display of open captions on movies shown in cinemas. Following Jerry, we'll have Shamika Andrews. Shamika is the Community Outreach Coordinator for the Self-Advocacy Association of New York State and the founder of Disability Empowerment Consulting, where she provides workshops in the areas of self-care, self-advocacy, and disability awareness. In 2006, she won the title of Ms. Wheelchair New York, and she's been the coordinator of the program since 2013. In 2017, she wrote her first children's book, Butterfly on Wheels. She serves as the New York State Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, Developmental Disability Advisory Council for the Office of Persons with Developmental Disabilities, and on the New York State Human Rights Disability Advisory Committee. Following Shamika, we'll have Julia Day, my colleague here at the Division of Human Rights. Julia is the Regional Director for the New York State Division of Human Rights Rochester and Syracuse regions, which covers 17 counties. She has been a part of the agency since 1978, starting as an investigator. She became a supervising investigator in 1990 and a regional director here in 2005. Julia's prior career was as a radio news reporter and broadcaster for WDKX Radio. She is a graduate of the University of Rochester, where she received the Birdsall Award for Political Science. She currently serves as the president of the Rush Public Library Board of Trustees, its deputy chair of the Rush Conservation Board, and is a member of the Rush Comprehensive Plan Committee. She is also a published playwright. Her original plays were selected and performed in several competitions and by a local professional acting troupe. She has received division awards for productivity and public service and has been honored with the Charles Evan Hughes Award from the American Society of Public Administration and with the Disability Rights Award from the Center for Disability Rights in Rochester. Widowed in 2020, Julia lives in a log house in Rush, New York, with her 2 dogs. And with that, Kim, I'm going to turn the program over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Commissioner, for such a lovely introduction. It was wonderful to be able to see you in person on Tuesday, so it was really great. And just before I touch off on what the Office of the Chief Disability Officer has been doing, I do just want to highlight what we were able to do on Tuesday, which was truly one of the most incredible events I think that I've been to in my memory. It's the first time a sitting governor in the state of New York has ever publicly acknowledged the importance of the ADA, the anniversary of the ADA, most specifically on the anniversary of the ADA. So it was a really phenomenal event to which we invited all different people with disabilities from across the state. People turned around an invitation within 48 hours, which for those of you who were able to attend, I really appreciate it. And I just want to say that I'm very honored to be here on behalf of Governor Hochul as the Chief Disability Officer of New York. It's been an incredible honor so far, and I'm very much looking forward to the work that we'll be doing in the future. So John had just asked me to do a bit of a run through on what the Chief Disability Office does, what we're here to do. And I think the most exciting thing that I have to announce today is that we are fully staffed. Very excited about that. I know that you guys, I don't think that you can all see each other, but all 3 of my staff are on the webinar. We have Kim Butchin, who is our executive assistant. She's the one that is holding all of us together. Not sure how organized we would be without her, but she keeps it all running. Megan Parker is our new deputy director. Most of you, I think, already know her. She comes from the New York Association on Independent Living, is a force of nature as an advocate, and now we have her within the executive chamber, and we're very excited to have her. And we have Ben Tapa as our senior policy advisor. He comes from Disability Rights New York, is a practicing attorney, worked on several different lawsuits on behalf of people with disabilities, and now we are extremely fortunate to have him here both as an expert on deaf and hard of hearing issues, but also with his legal expertise that he brings to the table. So now that we are all, we are completely staffed for the time being. We have been up and running very, very quickly. So just give you a little bit of background. The Office of the Chief Disability Officer stemmed from old legislation, an old office that used to exist years ago called the State Office of the Advocate for Persons with Disabilities. The new office that we have was really fought for several years by disability advocates once the old Office of the Advocate was dissolved. And at the end of last year, the beginning of this year, when it became clear that this office was going to become a reality, I think it was a victory for every different type of disability, because our office is responsible for and dedicated to serving every type of disability in the state of New York, and working hand in hand with all of the state agencies that provide supports and services to all of the different types of people with disabilities. So what we've been called in a couple of different meetings, which I find funny, it is silo busters. People are looking for us to be able to break down some of the silos that currently exist within state government, within state agencies. I think that we've all gotten used to being told that you need to belong to one state agency and that's where you need to go. And a lot of us don't fall so neatly into one agency or one package or one type of program or service. So our office is going to be responsible for trying to bridge those communication gaps, work with agencies together so that ultimately services are provided for the person that needs it in the easiest and most accessible and integrated way possible. So the statutory functions that our office has, we have a few that we are obligated to do under law, which is quite an exciting thing because this office did not need to be established in law. It could have just been created by the governor with either, she could have just created something within the chamber. What she chose to do was create it in law, which is, it means we're here for the long haul, that we can't be gotten rid of very easily, that we are here to represent the people with disabilities across New York State. And what she has charged us with doing statutorily, first and foremost, is advising and assisting state agencies in developing policies designed to help meet the goals of people with disabilities. We are also acting as the statewide ADA coordinator for the implementation of ADA for all the state agencies. And I think some of you are already aware, but John and I are working together once we are able to fully identify all of the state agency ADA coordinators to make sure that they are all trained and know exactly what their jobs are. Because I think that in many instances, we find out that people are assigned that job without any true knowledge of what they're truly responsible for and what they should be doing. So John and all of the amazing people at the Division of Human Rights are going to be helping us to make sure that they get trained once we have a full list, which is almost done, John, just so you know. We'll be calling on you pretty soon. So we're also here to coordinate state activities to ensure that state programs do not discriminate against people with disabilities, to make sure that they are accessible to people with disabilities, and to ensure that such programs and services are provided in the most integrated setting. That goes hand in hand with our mandate to chair the Most Integrated Setting Coordinating Council, which I'm guessing most of you are familiar with. It's been in existence for 20 years, been through many different agencies and chairpersons. And when this legislation was created, the governor's office decided that the best house for it was within the executive chamber under the Office of the Chief Disability Officer. So we are in a slow transition from taking it over from the Office of Mental Health. They have been phenomenal in helping us with the transition. And as part of the work that the Most Integrated Setting Coordinating Council, or what we call it as the MISC, is doing, we have been meeting regularly and monthly for lengthy meetings with stakeholders, the public members of the MISC and invited guests to start working on a comprehensive and effectively working Olmstead plan. The last time a plan was submitted to the state was in 2013, and they are supposed to be submitted yearly and then updated. So we are taking a look at what was done in 2013 and analyzing, reaching out to all the state agencies to see if all of that work has been completed, and then moving forward with new proposals and suggestions. So in addition to the statutory functions of our office, the governor made it abundantly clear when she created this office on the day that she created the office, she held an event. Hey, how are you? And she made it abundantly clear that employment is one of her top priorities, not just in the realm of the disability world, but across New York State. We're coming out of a pandemic. Unemployment rates are staggering for the general population, but when you start to break it down to the disabled population, it's far worse, as we all know. So she has committed to ensuring that the state hires at least 1,200 people with disabilities. She's charged our office with working with all of the state agencies that are typically the ones that help people get back to work or start working, with such agencies as the Department of Labor, the Office of Civil Service, Access VR, the Commission for the Blind, OPWDD, the Commission for the Blind. So we have already begun having conversations with all of them as to different strategies that we can implement to ensure the governor's goal. And we're also taking a very in-depth look at all of the roadblocks that exist that allow people with disabilities to earn a living in the same way that their non-disabled peers are able to, recognizing that without addressing that set of issues, that we are not going to be able to reach the employment goals that we are hoping to reach. So we've got a lot of work to do ahead of us. We've spent the last 4 months meeting.
Hi, Kim. Can
Yeah.
you speak up, please? Thanks.
Oh, sure. Is that any better? Can you hear me now?
I have it at max volume. It's difficult to hear you.
Okay, I'm not really sure why, but I will try to speak louder. So anyway, in the first 4 months of what we have been doing, our primary function really has been to meet with as many stakeholders as possible. I am pretty sure that we have met with almost every type of disability advocacy organization and the people with disabilities that represent those groups. And it's been an amazing and an enlightening experience, to say the least. We've created a lot of really great relationships with the stakeholders, and we will continue to do so. The thing that I want to stress is that our door is open to everybody, that we welcome the meetings. We are trying to learn as much as we can so that we can do more to help everybody. We've already chaired the first MIST meeting, and like I said, our Olmsted Planning Work Group is well underway. And let's see. I'm hoping in the very near future that we will have a website up and running so that more of our information can be readily available, but that we're working with our IT staff to get that up and running. How we are going to accomplish our goals really has a lot to do with our interaction with all the stakeholders. So we have to actively work with all the state agencies, both the ones that provide services regularly to people with disabilities and those who do not. We want to make sure that every state agency is aware that of our employment goals for people with disabilities, and that we're going to help them in our effort to make sure that our hiring practices reflect our goals. So that is one thing that we're doing. We're, like I said, we're meeting with a bunch of the other stakeholders outside in the community. We are going to be trying to collaborate with them to come up with our priority agenda as we move into the next legislative and budget session. So again, our door is always open. We're looking for new ideas. We're looking for ways that we can make New York a more inclusive, integrated, and accessible place for everybody. So we encourage you to reach out to us. For right now, I would say that the best way to reach out to us is through our general email box, which I can provide. I think you guys can probably, if you can put it up in the chat for us, it's accessibility@exec.ny.gov. So if you need to reach out to us, that would be the first way to do it, and we will get back to you as quickly as we can. I think other than that, I think I've covered it all. So John, if you want to turn it over to the next person.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kim. Appreciate all that information. And again, congratulations on the position. And we're grateful to have you here today as part of the program. Our next speaker is Alex Thompson, again, Director of Advocacy at the New York Association on Independent Living. So Alex, we'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John. And it's great to follow Kim, and appreciate all the work they're doing at the governor's office. So what I wanted to talk about first is what NIL does. So NILE is a statewide nonprofit membership association. We're created by and composed of independent living centers. So independent living centers are non-residential, community-based, and it gets back to Ed Roberts, who created the first independent living centers. As someone who was living in a hospital, used an iron lung, and wanted to go to college, and he was commuting basically on like a stretcher from the hospital to class. And that's kind of what independent living is about, is people with disabilities being able to do what they want to do, having a say in their lives. Our mission is to lead all the statewide independent living center efforts to eliminate physical and attitudinal barriers to all aspects of life, and to fight for the civil rights and full independence of all people with disabilities. And you can imagine the ADA is a big part of that, because it covers so much of our lives, from employment, public services, public accommodations, communications, and then of course I'm going to talk a little bit about the Olmstead decision, which is a big part of what we do and a lot of the independent living centers get involved in. So New York's independent living centers have prevented institutionalization and assisted people transitioning from being segregated in institutions back to the community. So that's kind of what our background is, where we're coming from. So Title I of the ADA is all about employment, and so that's equality in benefits and privileges and reasonable accommodations. So being able to get employment in your local community, having your employer make reasonable adjustments, and that's related to being able to do what you'd like to do in the community, being able to sustain yourself in the community independently. Part of our work has been to advocate for increased integrated employment options. So ILCs have successfully advocated for the state's Employment First initiative, which makes integrated employment with appropriate supports and services a priority. We're still working in New York to end subminimum wage. So subminimum wage is, there are these federal 14C certificates that will allow certain employers to pay people with disabilities lower than the minimum wage. So, as of April of 2022, there's still, about 37 of these federal certificates kind of floating around. So, that's something that we've worked to combat that practice. And as I said, integrated employment. So, not working in any kind of workshop, but people with disabilities being in the community, having that integration with fellow employees and the community as well. So Title II of the ADA is all about public services. So, as John and Kim were saying, that gets into, state and local government, somewhat into transit authorities, public transit, buses, but, also public services, programs, activities. So, part of NILE's work related to transit is, we've worked to make all Amtrak stations north of Albany accessible. That was a campaign by ILC advocates, talking about subways. When the ADA first passed, there was actually some disagreement about, before the ADA passed, advocates in New York City back in the 80s were forming these lawsuits to sue the MTA to get accessible stations. And they were trying to get it under the Rehabilitation Act, and they weren't really successful because of the interpretation. But they actually, and this is something I learned recently, they used the New York State human rights law. So, more power to New York State for, being a leader. And then once the ADA was passed, there was, further litigation, but, it started with a key station requirement. Just a few stations had to be accessible. And, over the years, advocates in New York City or ILCs in New York City have really been, keeping up on that issue. And, we were so excited this year that an agreement was reached with the MTA to add elevators or ramps to create stair-free paths of travel at 95% of the currently inaccessible subway stations by 2055. And not to forget that, in terms of commuter rail, one of our ILCs on Long Island Railroad has also, reached an agreement to get some additional elevator service, elevators out on Long Island Railroad at 3 stations out that way. ILCs have been involved in getting curb cuts. An agreement was reached in 2019 to, get accessible sidewalks put in place. Certain, and not just put in place, but surveyed, made accessible, maintained, tracked, and there's a transparent system in place. Also in New York City, accessible emergency and homeless shelter accessibility, which is something that, might not always get thought of, but, that's a key, it's a key thing to think about, as we think about intersectionality and multiple identities. And, we might see different populations overlapping, not just disabled person, but disability and poverty, and emergency preparedness is, becoming a bigger topic in our community. Title III, moving on in the ADA, public accommodation. So, barriers to services, must be removed if they're readily achievable. So, I love this thing I saw on Twitter recently about, people, you always hear, oh, it's grandfathered in. And so, it's really not. If it's readily achievable, it can be done. And, that's how we feel at NIAL, and, our advocates feel the same way. And we're always pushing, that readily achievable, a lot is readily achievable by all of us. And, with new technology and new resources, more and more is readily achievable every day. And then just touching on the Olmstead decision. So I'm skipping over, Title IV, which is communications, and hopefully some of the other speakers can talk more on that. But the Olmstead decision, which is, came out of the ADA, that's services and programs in the most integrated setting appropriate to the needs of individuals, and that's housing, assistance services, the state of, and that was not only 1999, and the state of Georgia that, was opposing this argued that it was inadequate funding. And, a lot of people with disabilities, I think, can still relate to that, with a lot of what they need, being told that there's not the funding, or there's not the resources, or there's an inability to provide access to them. So, from advocacy from ILCs, we've created programs that help people with disabilities live independently in their community. We have, the Access to Home program, which we're a home modification program, which we're still working on. And, the Olmstead housing subsidy program, so people can get housing and then get connected to more services. And I just want to also, mention disability poverty, which is something else that we're, aware of, and is a big part of what we want to try and address. And I know the governor has talked focusing on employment. This is a big thing. 30% of working age people with disabilities live below the poverty line. And we want to really move that in the right direction, compared with 11% without disabilities. And, I just encourage all the advocates to keep fighting. And even if you're just a disabled person, you don't consider yourself an advocate, you know, these are things that will affect you if they don't already affect you right now. And you know, we have business associations leading you know, efforts, or you know, to create ADA notification bills and things to kind of, you know, weaken some of our ability to move things forward. So I also, you know, encourage people to be, you know, cognizant of that, and you know, be in touch with us at NIAL. And we have, you know, advocacy committees. Check out our website, get involved, sign up for our newsletter, sign up for our action alerts, and I'll pass it on to the next speaker.
Thanks very much, Alex. Really appreciate that information from New York Association on Independent Living. And we value our partnership there. Our next speaker is Jerry Bergman. Jerry's with the Hearing Loss Association of America. And Jerry, we welcome you next.
Thank you, John. I want to thank the Division of Human Rights, Commissioner Imperial, and you, John, for hosting this event and inviting me to participate. I'm honored to say a few words on behalf of people with quote unquote sensory disabilities, but I must say up front, I know very little about the challenges faced by people with blindness or the challenges of being deaf or living with both blindness and deafness. Similarly, I suspect people with developmental disabilities may not know that 95% of people with hearing loss are unfamiliar with American Sign Language used by the culturally deaf, or maybe unfamiliar with the acronym CART, C-A-R-T, which stands for Communication Access Real-Time Translation, or simply captioning by a trained provider such as we have today. The reality is that one size does not fit all people with disabilities. Disability is a coat of many colors. And that's one reason why we continually urge policy and decision makers to do nothing about us without us. I'm fortunate to have lived in the hearing world until about 15 years ago, when I entered the realm of the hard of hearing as what we call a person who was late deafened. That's in contrast to those born with hearing deficit or who experience mild, moderate, severe, or profound hearing loss in their youth or as working adults. And the challenges are all different for those groups. An estimated 48 million Americans, somewhere between 15 and 20% of the US population, have a measurable hearing loss. Roughly half of this population is under 65. Including between 2 and 5 of every 1,000 children, according to the CDC. By age 65, 1 of every 3 people has a measurable hearing loss. And by age 75, that's 1 out of every 2. Scientific evidence also points to a link between untreated hearing loss and a decline in cognitive ability and the onset of dementia and Alzheimer's. I was fortunate to face living with progressive sensory neural hearing loss a number of years after the adoption of the ADA in 1990. I was equally fortunate to discover and become active in the Hearing Loss Association of America, which was founded 13 years before the adoption of the ADA. HLAA, as we're known, was originally called Self-Help for the Hard of Hearing. Self-help is no longer in the name, but HLA's mission continues to stress the importance of what we call self-advocacy. There's no question that accessibility has improved over the last 32 years, but there's a long way to go, especially when it comes to accessibility for invisible disabilities like hearing loss. And we won't get there without education and advocacy so that disabilities such as ours are universally acknowledged and understood in both government and the private sector by policy and decision makers. The ADA gave legitimacy to hearing loss as a disability. Some of its major requirements are employers with more than 15 employees must provide, quote unquote, reasonable accommodations in the workplace on request by employees with hearing loss. Public places must provide those with hearing loss with access to, quote unquote, effective communication, meaning via assistive technologies, CART, captioning, or ASL and/or ASL. Healthcare settings like hospitals, clinics, and doctors' offices are included among public places that must accommodate people with hearing loss. That's the intent. But as Rocky Stone, HLA's founder, said when the ADA was enacted, quote, "The law is a tool we must be prepared to use in asserting our rights within its framework. Without our action, this landmark legislation will be of little value to people who are hearing impaired," quote unquote. Today, agency at all levels of government, such as the State Division of Human Rights, exists to help achieve the promise of the ADA. They take up complaints, if filed by individuals, to see that the laws are enforced. And they are encouraged by enlightened government leaders, such as New York Governor Kathy Hochul. Just 2 days ago, Governor Hochul signed into law bills to increase the rights of people with disabilities and remove negative language such as the word retarded from state laws. Another significant piece of legislation is a bill unanimously adopted in Albany to establish a commission for the deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing. New York is one of only 12 states that lack such a commission to advise lawmakers, promote needed services, foster improvements in education and employment, and disseminate information for greater public awareness and understanding. Our New York State Coalition of the Deaf, Deafblind, and Hard of Hearing is confident that Governor Hochul will soon sign the commission bill into law. For too long, stigma, as well as a lack of understanding of our rights, have kept many people with sensory disabilities from embracing their conditions and speaking up. It's time to demand more. I came of age in the turbulent civil rights decade of the 1960s. So I'll close with the oft-heard rallying cry back then of civil rights leaders and the Kennedys. If not us, who? If not now, when? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jerry, for a terrific presentation. We very much appreciate your role in our council and all the great advocacy you do on behalf of the Hearing Loss Association. Our next speaker is Shamika Andrews. We welcome Shamika from the Self-Advocacy Association of New York State. Shamika, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, John, for this opportunity. I am glad to be a part of the New York State Human Rights Disability Committee. I'm Shamika Andrews. I'm just going to start off by telling you a little bit about the Self-Advocacy Association of New York State. Self-Advocacy Association of New York State is an organization founded for and by people with developmental disabilities. One of our founders was Bernard Carabello, who was a resident at Willowbrook. And not only are we celebrating the 32-year anniversary of the ADA, this year also marks 50 years of the story that Geraldo Rivera did on Willowbrook with the help of Bernard, one of our founders of the Self-Advocacy Association. If you are not familiar with that story, I suggest you look up the video, and there's a video that was released for the 50th anniversary, which is an interview with Geraldo and Bernard. So the Self-Advocacy Association supports individuals with developmental disabilities to speak up for themselves and their rights and what they want in their lives. As the previous speaker said, our motto is nothing about us without us. We encourage and support individuals with developmental disabilities to get involved with committees as this one in their own communities and make a difference not only in their lives, but the lives of the people in their communities and in the world. I am happy with the development of committees such as the Disability Committee as part of the New York State Human Rights, as well as the Autism Advisory Council that was developed by Assemblyman Santa Barbara a few years ago. Some of the other things that I am really proud to be a part of, and self-advocacy has been a part of, is bringing self-determination program to New York State, and also the changing of the name of the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities from its previous name, OMRDD. These are just a few of the accomplishments since the passing of the ADA. Some personal accomplishments I'd like to note is I currently live in a fully accessible apartment that was built 17 years ago. But even though it was built for people in wheelchairs like myself, the neighborhood was not accessible. So advocates in the community got together and advocated for sidewalks and curb cuts and traffic lights to be accessible, so those living in this neighborhood could not only live here, but move around our neighborhoods just like our neighbors. Some other things I'd like to highlight are the development of the talking library, talking books, and talking newspapers for those who are blind. Some other things that self-advocacy continues to advocate for is access for people with developmental disabilities to have access to technology like we are using right now. Self-advocacy has developed a program just this past year called Technology Me. You can find information about this program on our website, which will be shared in the chat. We also, at the beginning of the pandemic, started bringing all of our meetings online to support self-advocacy groups around New York State. You can find out about these meetings and how to get involved also on our website. One of our most popular meetings is our statewide meetings, which are held on Wednesday afternoons, where we talk about advocacy issues that self-advocacy is working on and things that are important to other people with developmental disabilities. We support self-advocacy groups around the state. Individuals join our organization, then they join groups in their committees, and we help to support and start and keep those groups going. Self-Advocacy Association has 7 regional offices around the state, one here in the Capital Region where I am. We have one in Syracuse, the New York City, Westchester area, Buffalo, the Finger Lakes, and Long Island. You can find the information to contact any of those offices on our website. So a few other things that I'd like to point out as far as the passing of the ADA. Yes, we have accessible transportation. Most buses in most areas are very accessible, but things like paratransit continue to be unreliable and unaffordable and not accessible to all. These are things that we will continue to advocate for, as well as improving access to housing in communities. There currently is more people looking for housing than is available. We will continue to advocate on these issues, as well as employment that was previously mentioned. I am proud to see a lot more conversation on entrepreneurship in the area connected to people with disabilities, as myself have my own consulting business and have found that this has opened many opportunities for me that I would love to see other people with developmental disabilities and all disabilities have those same opportunities. In that same realm, another advocacy issue is the fact that there is support for minority and women-owned businesses, but disability continues to not be a part of that. This is another advocacy issue that I hope to continue to work on as time goes on. So as we said, we are here to celebrate the passing of the ADA because it has brought us so many great things, but we still have so many things that need to be worked on. And I look forward to continuing to work with this committee and others to enhance the lives of people with disabilities all around New York State and beyond. So thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Shamika. Very much appreciate having you part of this program, and really appreciate you, emphasizing both the achievements and the challenges, which clearly still remain given the passage of the ADA. I'll also add that Shamika is one of those wonderful persons who always says yes. I've asked her a couple of times now to help us out with programs, and recently we were in Utica, New York, for a program that was sponsored by the New York State Office for New Americans, which has an initiative for immigrants with disabilities, which is really excellent. And Shamika did a terrific job speaking there on resources for immigrants and new Americans with developmental disabilities. So thanks again, Shamika. Following Shamika, we have my colleague Julia Day, who is the regional director here at the New York State Division of Human Rights. So Julia, we'll turn things over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. I was asked to speak from the personal perspective as an individual with a lifelong disability before and after the ADA. And I am honored to be part of this panel today. Over the years, I've given so many presentations about the Division of Human Rights and the human rights law, but I find that talking about me and specifically about my disability, that's actually a little harder. But imagine a 10-year-old girl living in an average suburban neighborhood in 1963. This 10-year-old girl was born with only one hand. She rides her bicycle, yes, she can do that, to the nearby Howard Johnson's. Anyone remember those 28 flavors? For an ice cream cone. On her way in, she stops at the cashier station and she explains that she wants to buy a 1-scoop ice cream cone, but she would like to pay for it in advance. She holds out her 15 cents. Yes, that's what it cost back then. The cashier says no. She said that is not the procedure. She tells the girl that she has to go in and get her ice cream cone at the service counter, then come back to the cashier and pay for it. Now, as you can imagine, that creates some difficult logistics for the 10-year-old girl with only one hand. How is she going to carry an ice cream cone? And they only offered the pointed style, and at the same time, give her money to the cashier. Maybe noticed that the girl was willing to assume all of the risk here, giving her money to the restaurant before she actually has the product. But the restaurant refuses that option. Well, given the dedication that most children have for ice cream, the girl figures out a way to accomplish it. And as you knew from the beginning of this story, I was that girl. But this story encapsulates for me what the world was like before the ADA, when even a modicum of accommodation was not available. Another encapsulation of the ADA is the very invitation that I received to speak to you today. In the past, my disability was rarely openly acknowledged, seldom even mentioned out loud. And I was encouraged by family, friends, school personnel, and professional contacts to keep it that way. Disabilities were something to keep quiet, often objects of shame. Here is a more poignant example of life with a disability before the ADA. Rewinding to when I was 6 years old, a boy my age had been harassing me for my disability at every opportunity on the school bus and in the playground. In the cafeteria one day, I saw him take a seat at a table nearby. Inwardly, I was praying that somehow he would not notice me. But a few minutes later he did, and he started in with his usual finger pointing, name calling, gesturing, and laughing. For the first time, I reached out to a teacher for help. It was also the last time I reached out for help. My teacher responded, "I never thought that would bother you. I am very disappointed in you, Julia." I kept the incident secret from my parents, figuring that they too would be disappointed in me. Growing up prior to the ADA, even though my disability never defined me, it did define aspects of day-to-day life. I was always worried about bullying from other children and even adults, just for being different. I was usually in a hurry because some tasks took more time with one hand, but I knew that regardless, I had to keep up. Tying sneakers became a major project. Velcro fasteners were not available yet. I had to fight for the chance to do what other children did. When the school invited students to learn to play their choice of musical instruments, I was discouraged from even trying. When I insisted that I wanted to learn, I was given a trumpet. I was told that was the only instrument that a one-handed person would ever be able to play. I went ahead and I learned my notes on the trumpet, practiced, and performed in the school band. I think my parents and maybe the whole neighborhood rather regretted that I was stuck with a brass instrument. When I reached my teens and had more freedom, I figured out that I could play the guitar, and I performed folk music for many years. Having a disability was a solo situation, which can be especially challenging when you're young and you don't yet have practical and emotional tools. For example, in gym class, teachers often assigned me to other tasks or just to watch when the class was playing volleyball or tumbling without offering me the chance to try. I learned to approach my teachers at the beginning of the semester and explain that I could do more than they might expect. Some teachers were receptive, some not so much. Either way, I was on my own. After college, I began my career as a radio news reporter, where extensive typing of news copy was required. I supplied my own typewriter that was designed for one-handed typing. It was one of the few pieces of adaptive equipment that was available back then, and it had taken 2 years to obtain it. Later, when the workplace began the transition to computers, my husband, who was an electrical engineer, re-engineered a standard keyboard to function in the right-hand Dvorak layout. I brought it to the office, and it enabled me to keep up with my colleagues. At that time, some of my coworkers were reluctant to turn in the pen for the keyboard, and I couldn't resist commenting, "Hey, if I can do it with 5 fingers, you can do it with 10. And that brings me to an example of the cascade of changes under the ADA. First Windows 3.1.1, then Windows 95, then Windows 2000, and all of the subsequent incarnations became gradually more adaptive for people like me. Now I can go to any computer or laptop, and with a few clicks of a mouse, well, I use a trackball, the keyboard layout switches for one-handed typing. The same adjustments that used to require special requests and different equipment and cumbersome procedures, now they're just here. And it's a benefit that builds upon itself. As more and better adaptive equipment becomes available, more people with disabilities venture to use it. Then, with increased demand, more adaptations are developed. Under the ADA, the culture gradually became aware of the need to accept and accommodate disabilities. For many businesses, accommodation became a badge of honor rather than a rejected inconvenience. Is it perfect now? Of course not, but the difference is amazing. Beyond the practical improvements, the indirect changes brought by the ADA are transformative. Having a disability, even as minor as my own, can be a daily struggle against impediments, obstacles, and the strange looks and comments from other people. But since the ADA and its gradual unification into our society, I don't feel that it's me against the world anymore. I'm still the type that's reluctant to ask for help, but now I know that help may be available. Children who used to be frightened of disabilities are now merely curious because the ADA has brought more differently abled people into functioning roles in their young lives. And now I can get an ice cream cone and pay for it in advance. Hooray! Because of the ADA, a disability does not have to be covered up, kept quiet, kept secret. There is a recognition in our society that a disability does not signify that one is worse than or less than someone else. I am grateful that there is a new foundation of understanding at work when receiving services, at education facilities, in recreation, and in social life, that having a disability does not mean that one can only be a second-class citizen. If I am respected, liked, and accepted in society, it is not in spite of my disability. It is not because of my disability. I can be accepted with the recognition and understanding that my disability is a part of me, but it does not define me. To me, that is the precious gift of our ADA world. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Julia. That was a terrific presentation coming from your perspective as a person living with a disability both before and after the ADA. Really terrific. I've had the pleasure of working with Julia here for over 14 years, and her perspective on civil rights enforcement for people with disabilities is one I always value. So thank you, Julia. We've come to an end of our program here. I'm going to turn things back over to our commissioner to close us out. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, John. And I want to also publicly thank you for your advocacy over the years and the role that you play here at the State Division of Human Rights. I'm so grateful that you are here. And Julia, I also want to thank you. Your story was beautiful. And I learned so much from Kim, Alex, Jerry, and Shamika as well. I just have some thoughts very quick. I don't want to keep everybody here, but what I heard was I feel more confident with Kim leading as our Chief Disability Officer for the state. And I love the role of being a silo buster. I never heard that word before, but that's perfect. And then I love Jerry's one size does not fit all. And the law is a tool, but with little action, it's of little use. And of course, what many of you said, that nothing about us without us. And I heard over and over the importance of self-advocacy and that it's time to demand more. we do have a lot of work ahead of us to be a more inclusive New York. But with your leadership, I feel confident that each day we're going to be moving forward. And I'll close with reinforcing what Jerry said. If not us, who? If not now, when? So thank you all for this wonderful celebration. And I look forward to continuing our work together. So thank you.